Get off my property, you little gold digger! My mother-in-law screamed, standing guard at the front door while suitcases lay scattered across the driveway like garbage. I had just returned from the law office, still wearing my formal black suit, unable to believe my eyes as I saw my entire life strewn across the walkway. Soaked cardboard boxes, expensive clothes scattered everywhere, and even my and Ethan's wedding photos thrown out like trash. If you're watching this video, please like and comment to let me know where you're watching from. And let me tell you how an ordinary Tuesday turned into the fiercest battle of my life. It was 6:30 p.m. Seattle's sky already dark with the usual drizzle. I had worked 12 straight hours at Blackwood & Partners preparing for tomorrow's crucial trial. My old Honda Civic, the only car I could afford with my own salary, pulled up to the Victorian mansion I used to call home. But nothing could have prepared me for this scene. The navy blue cocktail dress Ethan had given me for our 3rd anniversary was now lying flat on the walkway, covered in mud and fallen leaves. The law books I had carefully collected since college now had torn, soaked pages. Even the small box containing my grandmother's engagement ring, the only valuable item in my family, was thrown into the pile like worthless junk. "Mrs. Whitmore, what is this?" I tried to stay calm, my voice trembling as I saw neighbor Mrs. Chen standing in her adjacent yard, clearly witnessing this entire scene. "This is me cleaning house, sweetie," she sneered with that familiar arrogant tone. Ethan finally came to his senses. He realized what you really are, a social climber who never belonged in this family. I looked up at the master bedroom window, where Ethan and I had shared countless nights talking about our future. The lights were off. There was no sign my husband was home. To understand why this moment was so devastating, I need to tell you about my childhood. I grew up in a small rental house in South Seattle, daughter of a single mother named Isabella, who worked as a freelance graphic designer from home. My mother's income was unstable. Some months she'd make good money from big projects. Other months she'd have to borrow money to pay the $200 rent. This made our lives constantly uncertain and stressful. My mother suffered from bipolar disorder but refused regular treatment, forcing me from a young age to learn how to take care of myself. On her depressive days, she could stay in bed for weeks without getting up. On her manic days, she'd spend recklessly on unrealistic art projects. When I was 10, seeing my mother cry because the landlord threatened eviction, I decided I would become a lawyer someday. Not for money or fame, but because I wanted to protect people like my mother, those who were vulnerable and had no voice in society. I excelled academically enough to earn a full scholarship to the University of Washington. Instead of working part-time jobs like other students, I earned money by tutoring high school students in math and science in the area, charging $45 per hour. This was flexible work that allowed me to focus on my studies while maintaining steady income. When I met Ethan in a constitutional law study group, I was a senior law student with a 3.97 GPA who had already been accepted onto the Law Review editorial board. Ethan was classically handsome, always wearing polo shirts and khakis, driving a Porsche Cayenne his parents had given him at 18. He was studying business administration, but taking legal studies courses to understand more about the family business. The Whitmore family owned Whitmore Property Development, one of the largest real estate development companies in the Pacific Northwest, with over 25 projects from Seattle to Portland. They specialized in building luxury housing developments and shopping centers. Mr. Whitmore was the second generation running this business, and Ethan was being groomed as the successor. The first time Ethan brought me home during Christmas break of senior year, I had spent a week's tutoring earnings to buy a dress from Nordstrom Rack. Their mansion in Bellevue overlooked Lake Washington, with a circular driveway and professionally landscaped gardens. Inside, I counted at least 6 bedrooms, a formal dining room with crystal chandeliers, and a wine cellar that Mr. Whitmore proudly showed off, containing a collection worth over $150,000. Mrs. Whitmore had looked me up and down with contemptuous eyes from the moment I walked through the door. "So you're the scholarship girl," she said, emphasizing scholarship like it was a curse word. "How interesting. Ethan has told me so much about you." That dinner was torture. They talked about ski trips to Whistler, summer vacations in the Hamptons, and charity galas they regularly attended. When Mrs. Whitmore asked about my family background, I tried to explain about my mother diplomatically, but I could see the judgmental looks in her eyes when I mentioned freelance work and mental health issues. "Oh my," she said with fake sympathy. "That must have been so difficult for you, dear. But look how far you've come." The way she said "how far you've come" sounded like she was talking about a charity case that had been rescued. Throughout our 5-year marriage that followed, I endured countless small humiliations. When I wore an $89 dress from Target to Ethan's 30th birthday party at the country club. "Oh, honey, couldn't you find something more appropriate for the venue? Perhaps next time we could go shopping together." When I suggested we should save to buy our own house instead of living in the guest house on his parents' property, "Why would you worry about money, dear? Ethan has everything handled. Besides, families should stick together." Comments about my appearance never stopped. "Isabella, have you considered highlights? Brunette looks so heavy for your complexion." Or when I did my nails at home. "Oh, sweetie, you really should invest in professional manicures. Presentation is everything in Ethan's circles." And the most painful comment when I miscarried for the second time at 10 weeks. "Maybe it's for the best, dear. Some bloodlines shouldn't be mixed. These things happen for a reason." She said this right at the hospital, while I was still in both physical and emotional pain. Ethan, through all of this, would only say, "You know how Mom is. She means well. Just give her time." The final explosion happened on Thanksgiving last year. I had just been promoted to associate partner at Blackwood & Partners after winning an $8.3 million personal injury case for a construction worker who had been permanently disabled. This was the first case where I served as lead counsel, and this victory had put my name in Seattle legal news as a rising star in personal injury law. Instead of celebration, dinner at the Whitmore house that night felt like an interrogation. Extended family was present, Ethan's Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia from Portland, along with cousins Michael and Jennifer. Conversation revolved around Whitmore Development's business performance, real estate investments, and charity boards they served on. When Ethan mentioned my promotion, Mrs. Whitmore laughed condescendingly. "Well, I suppose someone has to be the diversity hire. Law firms these days have quotas to meet, you know." Silence fell across the table. I felt my face burning hot, heart pounding. But this time I had enough. I set down the crystal wine glass, looked her straight in the eyes, and said with controlled fury, "Mrs. Whitmore, I've tolerated your disrespect for 5 years because I love your son. But I will not sit here and let you diminish my achievements anymore. I earned my position through 80-hour work weeks, sleepless nights, studying case law, and dedication to my clients, not because of any quota." Shocked gasps from around the table. Uncle Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. Aunt Patricia suddenly found her stuffing very interesting. "Well," Mrs. Whitmore huffed, "I was simply stating facts about modern hiring practices." "The fact," I continued, standing up, "is that I graduated summa cum laude from law school. The fact is that I passed the bar exam on my first try with a score in the top 5%. The fact is that I just secured the largest settlement in my firm's history. These are facts, Mrs. Whitmore. Your opinions about diversity hires are just prejudice wrapped in polite language." Instead of supporting me, Ethan grabbed my arm and whispered urgently, "Isabella, don't make a scene. You know how Mom gets during holidays? Can't you just apologize and let it go?" That was the moment everything clicked. Ethan's reaction wasn't surprise or indignation. It was embarrassment. Embarrassment about me, not about his mother's behavior. That night, in the guest house where we lived, I spoke my truth to my husband for the first time. Ethan, you have to choose. Either me or your mother's approval. You can't have both anymore. I'm tired of being treated like an outsider in my own marriage. His answer shattered my heart. Isabella, you're being dramatic. Mom will come around eventually. She's set in her ways, but she doesn't mean harm. Just try to fit in better. Maybe if you didn't challenge her so much. Fit in better? I repeated incredulously. Ethan, I've spent 5 years trying to become someone I'm not. I've endured insults about my background, my appearance, my career. I've smiled politely while your mother questioned my worth as a human being. When exactly is enough going to be enough for you? Look, Ethan said, loosening his tie. I love you, okay? But I also love my family. They've given us everything. This house, my job, our entire lifestyle. I can't just burn bridges because Mom makes occasional inappropriate comments. Occasional? I laughed bitterly. Ethan, your mother told me my miscarriages were probably for the best because our bloodlines shouldn't mix. If that's not grounds for standing up to her, what is? At that moment, looking at my husband's face, the way he couldn't meet my eyes, the way his jaw set defensively, I knew this marriage was over. Not because Ethan didn't love me, but because he wasn't brave enough to love me publicly and fiercely. I began planning my exit strategy methodically. Secretly, I rented a studio apartment in Capitol Hill, just 0.8 miles from the office, close enough to walk to work, but far enough from Bellevue to avoid accidental encounters. The apartment was only 500 square feet with a Murphy bed and kitchenette, but it had large west-facing windows with a view of the city skyline. Rent was $1,800 per month, nearly a third of my take-home pay at the time. Instead of using traditional methods, I cleverly transferred money through investing in stocks and ETFs, then gradually cashing out to accumulate cash in a separate account. This not only helped me avoid attention, but actually grew my assets. I also secretly consulted with Margaret Martin, a divorce attorney with a reputation for handling high-asset divorces and complex family dynamics. Margaret's office was in the Smith Tower downtown, and during lunch breaks, I met with her to discuss options. Washington is a community property state, Margaret explained, so you're entitled to half of marital assets. But if you lived on property owned by in-laws, and most assets are in Ethan's name or family trusts, this could get complicated. We discussed Ethan's position at the family business, which was technically an employee salary but came with significant perks: company car, health insurance, housing allowance. The key, Margaret said, is documenting financial contributions you made during the marriage, including potential career sacrifices. But Mrs. Whitmore was smarter and more observant than I thought. It turned out she had hired a private investigator to follow me. This detective, a guy named Jim Morrison, ironically, had been tracking me for weeks. He had photographed me entering Margaret's office, documented visits to the Capitol Hill apartment, and even recorded conversations I had with the landlord. That afternoon, when I came home and saw belongings scattered across the driveway like garbage, reality hit me like a freight train. Mrs. Whitmore had orchestrated this while Ethan was on a business trip to Portland, meeting with potential new dealership partners. "Ethan's on his business trip in Portland," she said triumphantly, standing on the front porch like a queen defending her castle. "He gave me permission to clean house while he's away. Apparently he found out about your little apartment and your divorce lawyer meetings. He's quite disappointed in your deception, dear." My heart dropped to my stomach. Ethan had known and didn't confront me directly. Instead, he chose to let his mother do his dirty work. "You have 10 minutes to collect whatever fits in your car," she continued. Then I'm calling the police for trespassing. Neighbors had gathered. Mrs. Chen from next door, the Johnsons from across the street, and even teenage kids from down the block. Humiliation washed over me like a wave, but I forced myself to remain dignified. I carefully selected the most important items: laptop with law files, professional documents, a few changes of clothes, and irreplaceable personal items. Everything else, furniture we'd bought together, wedding gifts, 5 years of shared memories, had to be left behind. As I loaded the last box into my car, Mrs. Whitmore called out with fake sweetness, "Oh, Isabella, dear, I almost forgot." She held up a key ring. "You'll need these back. We've already changed the locks anyway." Driving away from the house that had been home for 5 years, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I called Margaret from the car. "Meet me at my office in 1 hour," she said firmly. "We're filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning." That night, I slept on an air mattress in the empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and feeling more alone than I had since childhood. But mixed with the pain and humiliation, there was something else, a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in 5 years, I was completely free to be myself. The following months were the hardest period of my life, but also when I discovered the real strength of my character. Without constant criticism and undermining from Mrs. Whitmore, and without having to walk on eggshells around Ethan's sensitivities, I began to flourish professionally in ways I'd never imagined. The divorce proceedings were messy. Ethan hired an expensive family law attorney, Robert Steinberg, who tried to portray me as a money-grabbing opportunist. They argued that since I had been planning an exit strategy while still married, I had acted in bad faith and should receive minimal settlement. Margaret fought back skillfully. She documented years of emotional abuse from Mrs. Whitmore, Ethan's failure to protect me, and the economic contributions I had made. We proved that my career had actually suffered because of family dynamics. I had turned down opportunities at other firms to maintain peace, and had been unable to network effectively because of Mrs. Whitmore's social blacklisting. The settlement ultimately favored me. I received 40% of marital assets, including substantial savings and investments Ethan had accumulated. More importantly, I was free. With the financial cushion from divorce, I was able to focus completely on career advancement. The first case I was assigned as lead attorney after divorce was a class action lawsuit against Cascade Insurance Company. Hundreds of families affected by the 2019 Eastern Washington wildfires had had their claims inappropriately denied. The insurance company was claiming that fires were acts of God, not covered under policies, despite clear evidence that utility company negligence was a contributing factor. This was the type of case the firm usually assigned to senior partners with decades of experience. But managing partner Michael Blackwood decided to give me the opportunity after seeing my dedication and legal acumen during divorce proceedings. "Isabella," he told me in his corner office with panoramic views of Elliott Bay, "this case will make or break careers. Success means partnership track and national recognition. Failure means starting over somewhere else. Are you prepared for that level of pressure?" I didn't hesitate. "I've been preparing for this my entire life, Michael." I threw myself into the case with obsessive dedication. 16-hour days became normal. Weekends were spent interviewing witnesses across central Washington, documenting property damage, reviewing thousands of pages of insurance policy language and state regulations. I hired independent fire experts, consulted with meteorologists, and built relationships with local officials who had witnessed the insurance company's unreasonable denials. The legal strategy was complex. Rather than simple breach of contract claims, we pursued allegations of bad faith dealing, deceptive practices under the Consumer Protection Act, and even RICO violations for systematic fraud. I personally interviewed over 200 plaintiffs, each person with a unique story of loss and frustration. One case particularly moved me. Sofia Martinez, a single mother of 3 whose mobile home, similar to where I grew up, had been completely destroyed. The insurance company denied her claim, saying fire damage wasn't covered because she hadn't maintained proper, defensible space around the property. But photos clearly showed that utility lines had sparked the fire, and Sofia had followed all local guidelines for brush clearance. "They make me feel like a criminal for losing everything," Sofia told me through tears. "But I paid premiums for 8 years, never missed a payment." The trial lasted 6 weeks. The insurance company brought a team of expensive Seattle attorneys from Preston Gates and Ellis. Media coverage was intense. Seattle Times, KOMO News, and even some national outlets picked up the story because of implications for wildfire victims statewide. My closing argument was passionate, but meticulously researched. I presented evidence of systematic claim denials, documented the insurance company's internal emails showing deliberate strategy to delay and deny legitimate claims, and demonstrated a clear pattern of discrimination against low-income policyholders. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I concluded, Cascade Insurance collected over $47 million in premiums from Central Washington residents during the decade before these fires. When catastrophe struck, they collected a second time, taking hope from families who had lost everything. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. Verdict: $47. $2 million in compensatory damages, plus an additional $15 million in punitive damages for bad faith dealing. The media explosion was immediate. The story appeared on the front page of Seattle Times with the headline, "Local Attorney Wins Record Wildfire Settlement." TV interviews followed with King 5, Cairo 7, and regional CNN affiliates. Legal publications wrote features about the strategy I'd used. But the most satisfying moment was calling Sofia Martinez to deliver the news. Her sobs of relief and gratitude were worth more than any professional recognition. Success opened many doors. I was invited to speak at the Washington State Bar Association conference, write articles for Trial Lawyer magazine, and most importantly, got recruitment calls from bigger firms across the Pacific Northwest. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I had been recruited as a senior associate at Morrison, Klein & Associates, one of the most prestigious personal injury firms in Seattle. My salary was $285,000 annually, plus substantial bonuses, nearly triple what I'd made at Blackwood. I had purchased a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a Belltown high-rise, with views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. Life had been completely transformed. My legal reputation was growing nationally. I'd been featured in Super Lawyers magazine as a rising star, and was regularly consulted by other attorneys on complex litigation strategies. Social life had improved dramatically, too. I'd joined the Seattle Young Professionals Networking Group, taken up rock climbing at the local gym, and was dating occasionally, though casually. One particular Friday evening in October, I was hosting a dinner party at my condo for important clients. Present were Jennifer Walsh, CEO of Microsoft's legal division, 2 partners from a San Francisco firm handling major tech acquisitions, and Mark Robinson, managing partner of Morrison Klein. We were discussing a potential $200 million settlement in a pharmaceutical liability case. My firm was co-counseling. At exactly 7:45 p.m., the doorbell rang. I excused myself, expecting the late arrival of another colleague. Opening the door, I was stunned to see Ethan standing there. He looked older, thinner, with stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during our marriage. In his hands was a bouquet of red roses, expensive ones from Pike Place market florists, I could tell. "Isabella," he said with a slightly cracked voice, "I made the biggest mistake of my life." Behind Ethan, partially hidden in the shadows of the hallway, was Mrs. Whitmore. But her appearance was shocking. The woman who had always been immaculately dressed, with perfect hair and expensive jewelry, now looked diminished. Her hair was gray at the roots. Her clothing was nice, but not the designer quality I remembered. And notably absent were the massive diamond rings and Cartier watch she'd always worn. "May we come in?" Mrs. Whitmore asked, her voice completely different from the arrogant tone I remembered. "We really need to speak with you." Curiosity overcame caution. I led them into the living room, acutely aware of the contrast between my elegant condo with city lights twinkling below and their obvious discomfort. Through the open doorway, they could see the dining room where my guests were engaged in animated discussion about legal strategies, wine glasses reflecting candlelight. "I'll be just a moment," I announced to my clients, who looked up with polite interest. "Please continue with the dessert course." In the living room, Ethan finally explained what had brought them to my door. The family business was failing. It had started with customer complaints about odometer tampering. Apparently, some employees had been rolling back mileage on used cars to increase sale prices. Initial investigations led to discovery of more systematic fraud, inflated financing rates, unnecessary add-on services, and even some stolen vehicles in inventory. "The Attorney General's office is investigating," Ethan said, his hands shaking slightly. "We've had 3 class action lawsuits filed in the past 6 months. Legal fees are approaching $800,000, and that's just the beginning." Mrs. Whitmore spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've had to mortgage the house to pay legal expenses. My jewelry, my art collection, everything's been sold to cover costs." Making matters worse, the IRS was auditing business books going back 5 years. Apparently, Whitmore Development had been creative about tax reporting, claiming personal expenses as business deductions and underreporting cash sales. "We need your help, Isabella," Ethan continued, his eyes looking desperate. "You're one of the best attorneys in Seattle now. Everyone knows your reputation after the Cascade insurance case. You understand both criminal defense and civil litigation." Mrs. Whitmore swallowed hard and added, I was wrong about you, dear. I see that now. You've become everything I should have recognized from the beginning. You're brilliant, successful, respected." The timing was surreal. Through the doorway, I could hear my clients discussing legal strategies involving millions of dollars, while my former in-laws sat in my living room begging for help with their declining fortunes. "We're prepared to pay whatever your normal fees are," Ethan said quickly. "We know this isn't a charity case." I sat quietly for several moments, processing the irony of the situation. Here, in the space I'd created with my own success, was the family that had systematically attempted to diminish my worth for years. Now they needed exactly what they'd spent so much time devaluing. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice controlled but with an edge of steel. "You want me to represent the family that threw me out like garbage 18 months ago? The same family where the matriarch told me I was a diversity hire and that my bloodline shouldn't be mixed with yours?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Isabella, I know we handled things badly." "Badly?" I interrupted. "Ethan, your mother had me followed by a private investigator. She changed the locks to our home and threw my possessions onto the lawn while neighbors watched. You were informed of this plan and chose to let it happen rather than face me directly." Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed. I was protecting my family. I thought you were threatening our stability." "Threatening your stability?" I stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. "I was threatening your control. There's a difference." Just then, the doorbell rang again. I excused myself to answer, finding Thomas Mitchell, managing partner from the prestigious firm Wong, Hartley and Associates in San Francisco. He was in town for a legal conference and had stopped by to discuss a partnership opportunity. "Isabella," he said warmly, I hope I'm not interrupting. I have an offer letter from the firm partners. We'd like you to consider joining as full partner with a starting compensation package of $450,000 plus equity stake. I invited Thomas in, introduced him to my dinner guests as one of California's top litigation attorneys, and watched Mrs. Whitmore's jaw drop as she absorbed the level of respect I commanded in professional circles. After Thomas joined the dinner conversation, I returned to the living room where Ethan and Mrs. Whitmore sat in uncomfortable silence. "You know what the irony is?" I said, positioning myself where they could see the dining room filled with successful professionals discussing high-stakes legal matters. 5 years ago, all I wanted was acceptance from your family. I thought your approval would somehow complete me. I turned to face them directly. But being rejected by you was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to discover my own worth, rather than deriving it from your validation. Ethan stood up, taking a step toward me. "Isabella, I love you. I always have. I was just weak. I chose the easy path instead of the right path." "Love?" I laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Ethan, love means standing beside someone when they're under attack. Love means choosing your spouse over your family's prejudices. What you had for me wasn't love. It was convenience mixed with cowardice." Mrs. Whitmore interjected desperately. "Isabella, please. We're desperate. The attorneys we hired aren't skilled enough. We need someone with your reputation, your abilities." That's when I delivered the line that would later be quoted in several articles about women's empowerment and career success. "I don't owe this family anything. But more importantly, I've learned that I don't owe anyone an explanation for my success." I walked to the front door and held it open. The answer is no. Not because I'm vindictive, but because I've moved on to much bigger things. I represent clients who respect me from day one, not people who only value me when they need something. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Whitmore made one final attempt. "We're family, Isabella. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Whitmore, family means people who build you up, not tear you down. Family means having your back when the world attacks you, not joining the attack. You were never my family. You were an obstacle I had to overcome to become who I was meant to be." Ethan paused in the doorway. "What about everything we shared? 5 years of marriage?" "Those years taught me an important lesson," I replied. "They taught me the difference between settling for peace and fighting for respect. I'll never settle again." After the door closed behind them, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because I'd rejected their plea for help, but because I'd finally achieved total closure with the most painful chapter of my life. Returning to the dinner party, my guests were deep in discussion about legal strategy innovations. Thomas Mitchell pulled me aside. "Isabella, that partnership offer is serious. We've been watching your career development, and frankly, you're operating at a level that surpasses many attorneys with decades more experience." Jennifer Walsh from Microsoft nodded approvingly. "I've been recommending you to colleagues across the tech industry. Your approach to complex litigation is exactly what major corporations need." That evening, after the guests had left, and I was alone in my condo overlooking Seattle's glittering skyline, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from trailer park girl to one of the city's most sought-after attorneys. Ethan texted me later that night. "I understand your decision. I just want you to know that I'm proud of what you've become, even if I wasn't strong enough to support you getting there." I didn't respond. Some chapters of life deserve to be closed permanently. 6 months after that encounter, I accepted the partnership at Wong, Hartley and Associates and moved to San Francisco. My specialization in corporate litigation and class action suits had earned national recognition. Forbes magazine featured me in their 30 Under 30 Legal Eagles article, and the American Bar Association invited me to keynote their annual conference on legal innovation. But success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about purpose. I established the Isabella Martinez Legal Foundation, using my maiden name, to provide legal services for low-income families facing corporate exploitation. Cases involving tenant rights, wage theft, and insurance fraud became my passion projects, alongside high-profile corporate work. Sophia Martinez, the woman from the wildfire case, became a board member of the foundation. "You saved more than my house," she told me during the foundation's inaugural dinner. "You saved my faith that the system can work for people like us." 2 years later, I heard through the legal community grapevine that Whitmore Development had filed for bankruptcy. Ethan was working as a sales manager at another dealership, and Mrs. Whitmore was living in a modest apartment in Kent, a significant downgrade from the Bellevue mansion. Part of me felt sadness for their circumstances, but mostly I felt gratitude that their rejection had pushed me toward my authentic life. I never remarried, though I dated successfully. My standards had evolved dramatically. I now sought partners who celebrated my ambition rather than tolerating it, who saw my success as an asset rather than a threat. One particular relationship with Henry Brown, a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime, lasted 2 years. When he was transferred to the Washington, D.C. office and asked me to move with him, I seriously considered it, but ultimately, I chose in favor of opening my own firm in Seattle. "I need to build something entirely my own," I explained to Henry during our final dinner together. "For too many years, I defined myself in relation to other people's expectations. Now, I want to see what I can create when I'm completely free to be myself." Henry understood. "That's what I love most about you, Isabella. You never compromise your vision for anyone." My firm, Martinez and Associates, opened in Pioneer Square, with 3 associates and a focus on civil rights litigation, corporate accountability, and family law. Our mission statement, framed in the lobby, read, "Excellence in legal representation with commitment to justice for all economic backgrounds." The irony wasn't lost on me that I had returned to Seattle, the city where I'd experienced my greatest humiliation, to build the greatest professional triumph of my life. The office space was in a historic building, with exposed brick walls and views of Elliott Bay. The conference room was decorated with photos from major cases we'd won, including several class action settlements worth millions. But my favorite decoration was a small framed photo of my mother Isabella in her graphic designer uniform, taken the week before she passed away from cancer. She had lived to see my success with the Cascade insurance case, though she didn't survive to witness the firm opening. In her final weeks, she had said something I carry with me daily. "Mija, you became everything I dreamed but never dared to imagine. You didn't just escape poverty. You became a voice for people still trapped in it." Today, 5 years after Mrs. Whitmore threw my belongings onto that driveway, my firm employs 12 attorneys and has won settlements totaling over $150 million for clients who had been dismissed or ignored by larger firms. We specialize in cases where individuals face corporate giants, insurance companies deny legitimate claims, or families fight for basic dignity against institutional prejudice. Last month, a young Latina attorney named Carmen Rodriguez joined our team. She reminded me of myself at 25, brilliant, determined, but carrying a chip on her shoulder about proving herself worthy. During her interview, she asked, "What advice would you give to someone who feels like she doesn't belong in high-end legal circles?" My answer was immediate. Stop trying to belong. Start building spaces where you set the standards. Excellence speaks louder than acceptance ever could. Carmen is now working on a major case involving a tech company's discriminatory hiring practices. Watching her develop legal arguments with the same passion I once felt reminds me why the journey was worth every moment of pain. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder what would have happened if Mrs. Whitmore had welcomed me genuinely from the beginning, if Ethan had possessed the courage to defend our marriage, if I had been accepted rather than rejected. But those thoughts never last long. The truth is, their rejection was a gift they never intended to give. It forced me to discover strength I never knew I possessed, to build a life entirely on my own terms, and to define success by my own values rather than their approval. Every successful case, every client whose life improves because of our work, every young attorney we mentor, these achievements exist precisely because I was forced to find my own path rather than following theirs. As I write this, sitting in my corner office with panoramic views of the Seattle skyline, I'm preparing for closing arguments in a pharmaceutical liability case that could result in a $300 million settlement for families affected by dangerous drugs. Tomorrow, I'll stand before a jury and advocate for people whose voices might otherwise go unheard. That scared girl who once desperately wanted acceptance from the Anderson family is gone. In her place stands a woman who learned the most important lesson of all: the only approval that matters is your own. They thought they were punishing me by throwing me out. Instead, they freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. Sometimes the cruelest rejections become our greatest blessings, and sometimes people who claim to know our worth understand it least of all. I am no longer that broken woman sitting in an empty apartment, wondering if she deserved better. I am an attorney who fights for justice, an entrepreneur who built something from nothing, and a woman who never again needs anyone's permission to take up space in this world. That transformation, from seeking approval to demanding respect, has been worth every moment of struggle. And finally, when I look back, I realize that the best thing that happened to me wasn't the success, wasn't the money, wasn't the fame. It was the moment I stopped asking permission to become who I could always have been. Now, every morning when I wake up in my penthouse, looking out at the city I've conquered through pure talent and determination, I remember the last words I said to Mrs. Whitmore. I don't owe anyone an explanation for my success. And that remains the most powerful truth I've ever spoken. Thank you for watching this far. If you were in my situation, what would you have done? Do you think I should have helped them, or was my decision right? Have you ever felt like you had to prove your worth to people who only knew how to undervalue you? Please comment to let me know your story, and see how many people out there agree with the choices you'd make. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can watch more inspiring stories about overcoming adversity and standing up for yourself in future episodes.